Hey, Carl here for ProAV TV. I'm joined by Tom Crocker from Sony. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you for having me.
Excellent. Right, so we've taken a look at the FS7 Mark II. I've run through the tech specs and stuff like that, so we don't need to cover any of that in this video. But what I just wanted to do was sit down and talk to you about the thought process sort of behind it from Sony's point of view. Why this camera? Why now?
Well, the FS7, the first iteration of it, was of course hugely successful. And there's loads of cameras out there and we're thrilled to see that people are using them and so pleased with them. But there's been a lot of feedback. We haven't built the perfect camera. I don't expect anybody ever will for everything anywhere. So all we can really hope for is gradual improvements. And some of these improvements were really obvious ones that we wanted to make and develop the FS7 from a lot of users who just wanted a little bit more out of it, particularly in terms of the ergonomics and how they're working with it as a sort of run and gun type camera.
That's what it is at heart, really, isn't it?
That was what we were trying to solve with the FS7, was an ergonomic approach to doing a large sensor camera that people could actually take out into the field. I mean, of course, large sensor, we're talking Super 35, we're talking the cinema world, where people wanted shallow depth of field, and people want that stuff, but it leads to a range of challenges when you're moving out and about in the field. So of course we had in the original one things like the handle, things like the button, the general layout of the camera so that you could hold it in a number of different places. But of course then we got a lot of feedback about things that we could improve, things we could do better. So we listened to that, and out of that was born the FS7 II. So things like the ND filter, which we took from the FS5, of course.
That was one of the biggest cries when the FS5 was first released, wasn't it? Like, this looks amazing. Can I have it on my FS7?
Well, exactly. And the answer fundamentally was yes. But of course, it took us a little while because we then had to take things quite literally back to the drawing board and find a way to fit this stuff in. The cameras, don't open one up at home, but if you ever do, you'll see that they are quite full of stuff already. So there's quite a lot of engineering effort involved in fitting extra stuff in. But we've managed a fair bit with this one. So things like the ND filter, things like the locking lens mechanism, being able to put bigger lenses on, significantly bigger lenses on, without needing rod supports. So if you're using, for example, Cabrio type zooms, if you're using B4 type lenses on there,
or wildlife, massive telephoto lenses,
exactly
like
that type of thing. Knowing that you can have faith in your lens system. Also, if you have got a larger built-up system, twisting the lens itself behind a matte box, behind a follow focus can be quite tedious. Being able to flick that mount across and put another lens straight in can be a huge benefit to a lot of people.
That a couple of times.
And then, of course, just other little bits of feedback we got. It was a little fiddly to take the cards out with gloves, so we changed the angle on the card insertion mechanism. Things like the rods at the top. There's an argument for using standard 15mm rods because they're all over the place and you can then build it out how you want. Some people are very happy with that. They've built other systems, and of course a range of third-party accessories has grown up around that as well, which is great. But for some people, also they just wanted some rods that wouldn't slip in any context, which is why we made them square. So it's incremental improvements. It's an evolution rather than a revolution, to use an incredibly tired phrase.
So what do you think about the sort of target audience and target base of it? So now the current lineup, we've got the F55, the F65 above it, got the F5, we've got the FS7 II, FS7, and below it.
That's one thing that's very important, is we haven't taken away the FS7. Because I think there are different groups of people, particularly between the FS7 and the FS7 Mark II.
So the original camera catered for such a wide sort of variety.
It did. I think the feedback we got from a group of those people, there are a lot of people who might look at the FS7 Mark II and say, I don't necessarily need these features. In which case, you don't go for the FS7.
That's why you kept on the FS7.
Exactly. But there are some people who were shouting quite loud about some of these features. And yeah, we're glad to have been able to put together something for them. So
exactly. Cool. Just before we wrap up, can we talk a little bit about the BT 2020 side of it? Because that's very interesting, something I've talked in a little bit more depth with you than I did cover in my original video. So it does have BT 2020 support. It will record BT 2020, but there's a bit of a confusion as to what that actually means.
So you've got the 709 color space,
yes,
and the P3 color space, and all of these color spaces that people are more or less familiar with.
Yes.
2020 is then a new one, part of a new standard, replaces Rec 709 for the future. Then
Exactly.
we can start talking about 120p playout frame rates and 8K rasters and all kinds of stuff. We've sort of picked up the ball and thrown it a bit further ahead in a lot of different aspects. Now, one of those is the color space. Now, the color space in 2020 is absolutely enormous. It covers a huge amount of what the human eye can see, and that's a lot more than any camera on Earth at the moment can see. If you look at the F65 and F55, we've developed a special color filter array for those cameras, which allows them to see a lot of BT 2020, more than any other camera can. But that's not what we've implemented here.
And even that still isn't all of BT 2020.
Even that's still not all of it. It'll be quite a long time before we can capture all of it. It will probably be even longer before we can display all of it. So really, this is a technology that we can grow into. The BT 2020 support that we're talking about within this camera is taking the colors that it can see, which is, granted, more than we can display in the 709 world.
Yes.
But correctly mapping that into the BT 2020 color space, so that when you're working through, for example, the grading post-production pipeline, the colors are in the right place and you're not experiencing shifts, because the place where a particular green is in that image arc or in that color volume is not necessarily identical between 709 and 2020. So making sure that we can conform to the standard as published is very, very important for that type of workflow. It doesn't mean we cover the whole thing. Nobody does, and the cameras that get closest are the 55 and 65. But that process is something for the very, very high end.
Yes.
Because simply the chemicals required to build a color filter array like that are quite costly, and it's not something that the general market at this stage is going to accept, but like all technology over time, that's going to be cheaper and come into more things. But like I say, we can't even show all of the BT 2020 colors on a display that you have yet. So,
cool. So the people who buy the FS7, so that pool of customers rather than their F5, F55, F65 customers, why should they care that BT 2020 is in there? What does it gain for them?
Today, it's about the ability to resell your archive. It's about making sure that you are compliant with future standards later on.
So that when HDR is much more commonplace, all that sort of stuff is around.
That type of stuff comes in.
Then
you can say, well, this stuff I've got on the shelf, this still works. Now, that said, in terms of the colors, you can fix it with LUTs. It's just more complicated.
Sure.
But if you are commissioned to shoot something 2020, which people are beginning to be now, then it's a little easier with this one than it was in the last one. But of course, the last camera we're talking about coming up on 2.5 years ago.
It was,
when this stuff was much less widespread. So it's been significant for us to be able to include it here.
Awesome. Okay, thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Right, thanks for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.